how to break free from emotional numbing and starting to feel again. And obviously, in our framework of Feel, Heal, Manifest, there's a big focus on feel. And I want to go into some of the more practical aspects of this topic, how to break free from emotional numbing and start feeling again. So if you've ever felt disconnected and you're aware that things are pretty leveled, right? Like you don't have big spikes of emotions up or down. The whole thing around blocking our emotions or not wanting to feel emotions is a kind of a protection mechanism, right? Like internally we are built in such a way to protect ourselves. And this mechanism kicks in, it shows up in the form of not wanting to feel. And while it protects us from feelings that you could say is the mind deems as bad, we also then block out everything else, right? So we block out joy and excitement and the so-called good emotions as well, or the emotions that we want to feel. And today in this session, or in this message, today I want to look at why we numb and what actually happens and how it's actually there to protect us. Some signs when we actually do this with or without realizing it. A lot of times we're not really aware of it. It's unconscious. And what you can do about it, right? Look, so how you can actually start to feel again and experience life more fully once again. So if you relate to this, then obviously it's speaking to you. We tend to do this, right? To block out, to numb out the feelings, and numb out is just one of the strategies of the minds. It's to subconsciously or unconsciously disconnect from our feelings, to protect ourselves from something that perhaps is from our past. And you could say pain or trauma. And sometimes it can just be too overwhelming. So the coping mechanism then is to just block it out, right? To not want to feel it. And yeah, it can come from earlier in our timeline, in our childhood or earlier. Like you can always trace things back most of the time to our past, where maybe there's been neglect or trauma or emotional kind of invalidation. Don't feel, block your feelings, stop crying, that kind of stuff. In more kind of recent parts of our timeline, as an adult, it can show up as chronic stress, anxiety, burnout, right? Hitting the wall and or maybe just trying to avoid. Sometimes things happen which are quite a big kind of emotional impact. So we tend to want to not feel the uncomfortable emotions like grief or shame or fear, right? So we tend to then not want to feel and block it out. And the brain is just kind of trying to protect us, right? It's like trying to shut these emotions down. But this protection mechanism over time of not wanting to feel creates a disconnect. So we're disconnected from our emotions and therefore we're disconnected from people around us as well. If you block out certain things, then it tends to block out almost everything. And included in that is a lot of times the good things, right? Love and joy, right? That we want to actually experience. Some of the signs, or the 5 signs that are blocking out. One is that we avoid deeper emotions. So the big spikes, right? Like the highs and the lows, we tend to it's all very same. And it's almost like a flat lines of emotions. And as much as you want to avoid the difficult emotions, let's say like sadness, we don't allow ourselves, for example, to feel joy fully, for example, on the other side of the spike, right? The peaks and the troughs. And this kind of flatness, emotional flatness, because it's so practiced, we just accept it as normal. That's just how things are. That's just how I am. And it's not even something that we do logically. It's just something that over time just feels normal, right? So it's habitual. We tend to rely a lot on distractions as a coping mechanism. So social media, obviously, it's going to be on the list. Binge watching shows, for example, or like emotional eating, or just anything to keep ourselves from sitting with the uncomfortable feelings or what we deem to be uncomfortable or difficult, right? So I don't want to feel that it's too difficult, it's too much. So I'm just going to not deal with that. You feel disconnected from relationships, for example. The relationships then tend to be more surface level and we tend to not want to feel the difficult emotions. We don't want to be present with them. And therefore we don't want to be emotionally open either. So because we're blocking out certain emotions, we also block love from coming in and or probably going out as well. The busy becomes a badge of honor. You feel busy and it's a lot of doing and you're probably very good at doing, and doing is a coping mechanism. but then internally, emotionally, we just feel empty. And I've certainly experienced this in my life as well. Like really all of these I've experienced. So always doing, but rarely being, right? Like we forget that we're a human being and we become a human doing, as I've said before. And life just becomes full of like check boxes, right? Like tick boxes. And sometimes we see that when people come into this work, for example, and it's okay, I've done the meditation and I've done this and I can't do this and I can't do all of that. Or we tend to get in our heads. We climb in our heads and not want to feel. So that's another way we tend to block out. And you struggle to identify with feelings, for example. So when people say, how do you feel? You might say something, you might have an answer, but actually the honest answer is deep inside. You're probably going, I actually don't know how I feel. And it's uncomfortable again, right? So those are the things, the 5 kind of signs. And how to actually break free from it. To create space. To create space by actually feeling. And if you've been to Awaken, you would have heard me talk about and teach on breath and body connection, right? You could say, oh, okay, if you want to do it in a heady way, you could say, okay, I'm going to set a timer where every few, whatever minutes, there's going to be a reminder for me to breathe or for me to feel. Fine, if you need to do that, start with that, great. But even in our mini Awaken that I was teaching, what was it, on the weekend, we did a whole exercise on pausing and taking a breath. And sometimes people take one breath and then that's it. Continue. Keep doing the deep breathing. And as you're doing the deep breathing, feel the sensations. Maybe emotions are too big to deal with first, but we can deal with sensations. So what are the physical sensations of the label, the name, right? So that's another thing that we did at Mini Awaken on the weekends. Physical sensations of the breath, physical sensations in the body. So if you're saying, oh, I feel fear right now. So, okay, how does fear show up in the body? What sensations put together represents the label of, let's say, fear? Or sad, I feel sad. How does that show up in your body physically by way of sensation? And then doing something so first part is presencing it, acknowledging it, seeing it as it is, not less, not more, just as it is, right? So the mind will want to minimize it or it will want to blow it out of proportion. Do neither of those. Stay present with it. Okay, this is what I'm feeling. So you might start with physical sensations, then you become more present to the actual emotions, right? Emotion, energy that wants to be in motion. So therefore, the next step then is to let it be in motion. So therefore, that's why we do conscious movement and conscious breathing as we do the conscious movement. And by doing the conscious movement, in which our case, in our body of work is yoga, and of course you can do that with other forms of movement. But in yoga, I want to say it's easier. Maybe it's biased because I've been doing it for some time. It's easier to do deep breathing and thread the postures, weave it in with the breath. So the breath is the consistent. It's like you're threading beads together and the string is the breath and the beads are the postures. So you're threading it together with the breath and the consistent is the deep breathing and the postures you're coming in and out of and you're moving. As you're moving the body in our connective tissue, in our musculature, is where we hold emotional patterns, right? So the narrative in the mind, which takes the form of emotions, we tend to store in our body. So therefore, I always say the body tells the story of your life. And there's other books that have been written about that too. So by doing conscious movement, deep breathing, we are starting to literally untangle, you could say, free up those emotional patterns from the body. And therefore, we are rewiring the brain and the nervous system into a new configuration. And you start with creating space first, and then you can consciously choose, which is the next step. Consciously choose, okay, what emotions do I want to live in? What's the internal emotional home that I want to live in? Like your physical home, you could say, okay, I'm clearing out the house and I'm creating some space. And in our emotional home, we can do that too. We can clear out the house and actually we can reconstruct the emotional house in whatever way we want and whatever we want to fill it with. Living in joy is a conscious choice. Living in peace is a conscious choice, right? So therefore, choices that you make are going to give you different results and also allow you to live in certain emotions. And then the other part of it is, I truly believe one of the most powerful things about our community is the community. Yes, the process is powerful. Yes, it works. We've got countless numbers of testimonials. Most of you here in this live session have had some experience. But the other part, one of the most powerful parts, I would say, is people come in normally for the process and the interventions and the healing, but people stay because of the power of the community. So just know that you don't have to do it on your own. And that's the power of us when we do our mini awakens and when we do our events and programs, that you can come together and hear other people's experiences, and or if you're sharing as well, and realize that you're not alone and that you don't have to do it on your own, which is another form of, I've got this. I don't need anyone. I don't need you. I don't need anyone. But actually you don't need anyone, but you can want support. You can have and you can receive the support, which is another way of actually clearing out the blocks and letting there be flow of, let's say, love, right? So connection and love. And it may not be an overnight thing. Just because you decide you're going to start to feel doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and doesn't mean everything falls in your lap. It can be a process. And sometimes I read things where people say, oh, take a 5-minute break and schedule it in and do a kind of break where you're breathing and feeling fine. If that's what helps you, great, do that. But actually, you're always breathing and we're always in some kind of physical posture. So as often as you can, train yourself to come back to the breath, train yourself to come back to the body, train yourself to come back to paying attention to the sensations and the emotions. And therefore you bring yourself back. And it's a practice, not a perfection. So that the more you practice it, the easier it does become over time as you allow yourself to feel. And having a space where you can come and process. And this is why I think in what we do in Elevate Premium, our mini awakens are so powerful, where once a month we come together and you don't have to do it on your own. Because if I could do my transformation on my own, then I would have, just like you would have. But it's just that I don't see my blind spots. I'm in the roller coaster and I'm not sure which way it's going. I just know it's all crazy. And most of us, when we're in our emotional roller coaster, when we're in our process, it's difficult. It's almost impossible to see. And it's also difficult to guide ourselves through the process. So therefore, having someone who's done it before and actually being in a community where other people are also up for it and up to something in their life, they're up for the transformation, can accelerate the process and support your journey as well. So there you go. As you've heard me say, the doorway to healing is to feel. So if you want to heal something in your life, is to feel. Feel your body, feel your breath, feel your emotions. And that is the first step. That's why the framework that we've got, Feel, Heal, Manifest, before you can get to the healing part, before you can manifest the life of your dreams, it starts with getting present. And the simplest way I've found to get present is breath and body connection.